The amount countries spend on education is a big concern to people like Alice Albright. She's the CEO of an organization called Global Partnerships and is working to improve education around the world. She says the global financial crisis has made it harder to keep education a top priority.
It is hard to show results in a short period of time. And what you see in eras of financial weakness is that parliaments, when they allocate money, want to see results very quickly. But in education, it takes decades to make an education system function well.
I'm going to paraphrase this, but the first woman president of the African continent was talking about some of the challenges, and about the fact that, there's so much aid sent to the continent in terms of food aid and that sort of thing. But she talked about what poverty, a lack of education, what wars can do, and how damaged the people themselves are. And the reason why I wanted to frame this that way is because you're involved in education, but you're also involved in the Central African Republic, where war has just ravaged that country. So talk about that dynamic of a young child striving to get an education and yet dealing with the nightmare of being in a war zone.
Well, there's many levels of challenge there, and you're right to point out the Central African Republic. It is an absolute disaster and so sad about what's going on. But it's an example of what happens in a number of countries, and we call them fragile and conflict-affected states. Often you have no government. Often what happens in a war is that the schools get immediately used by militias to become staging centers. So the infrastructure part of education gets destroyed very quickly. But what's even more profound is that all of a sudden the kids who normally think of school as their fun place to go, it's their source of routine, it's their source of normality, is all of a sudden gone. And so there's a lost opportunity in terms of the kids learning, and you can't replace the years of learning. It's one of the most the saddest parts of education. But also there's a huge emotional toll, because kids who thrive, we all know this, kids who thrive on routine are all of a sudden completely emotionally destabilized, and often for life.
Let me ask you this question, which I'm sure you're very well aware of. You're a woman. Girls are still second-class citizens in a lot of countries. When it comes to education, they're left behind. What can be done there, and what are you doing and your organization doing in that regard?
Well, girls' education is a huge focus of ours, and we're beginning to see a lot of progress on it. Rwanda, for example, is a country where it has begun to have significant progress in girls' education, and now girls are not, there's not this big gap between girls' and boys' education. But what do you do about it? First of all, you need to talk to the government about how important educating girls is, and it's not just a question of rights, but there are all kinds of data that show that if you educate girls, there are very positive knock-on effects for the rest of the country. They educate their own kids. They take their kids to the doctor. They're very conscious of health concerns. They're much more likely to get a job. They're much more likely to think about the family's finances in a different way. I mean, there's a lot of positive reverberating effects from educating girls. So what we do about it is, first of all, we make sure that countries that we work with have girls' education front and center in their policies. So that's one thing we can do. The more complicated, tricky issue is other cultures who absolutely do think that women and girls are second-class citizens. And so that's trickier. How do you get at sort of pointing that out without sort of dismissing another country's culture? And that takes, quite a bit more time in terms of educating authorities about, let's try to think about this a little bit differently.
Alice, thank you for educating us about education. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So nice to see you. Thanks for having me here.